Welcome back. You're watching The Fix with me, Karima Brown. I'm still in conversation with Vusi Mavimbela, a former spy boss who served both former President Thabo Mbeki as well as Jacob Zuma. We are speaking about his memoir titled Time Is Not the Measure, which of course will be launching this coming Thursday. Mr. Mavimbela, in this memoir, you also speak about the rift that began between the two men, who was Deputy President of the country, Deputy President of the ANC, President of the country, President of the ANC. And you were kind of caught in the middle. And there's a fascinating chapter where you talk about convening some sort of kitchen cabinet to talk about whether it is natural to assume that Mr. Zuma should succeed Mr. Mbeki as president of the country. And of course, you were bold enough in that meeting to suggest the name of Mr. Joel Neshitenzi. And you said everyone looked at their shoes as if there were patterns on their shoes. Nobody said anything. But former President Zuma laughed so loudly that the tears came out of his eyes. Do you think that that was the moment at which the two men kind of finally realized that the one doesn't, Mbeki doesn't want Zuma to succeed him because he's not impressed with him, and Mr. Zuma believes that people are trying to clip his wings and put a halt on his political ambitions?
I won't know exactly when it started, but from what I observed, it really started during the time when Zuma was in KwaZulu-Natal as an MEC.
Yes.
Because Mbeki used to comment about the things that were happening in KwaZulu-Natal. So when the crunch time came, Mbeki's position was that he doesn't think that he's fit for the job. He would cite things that had happened in KwaZulu-Natal in his portfolio to say, now, if this man upgrades to this position, does he have the capacity to do things that we think needs to be done? So he began to have doubts in his mind, in Mbeki, but there was not much room for him to maneuver. So when we set up that kitchen cabinet and made a proposal to him, of course we were hoping that he's going to take the proposal. But he didn't, for whatever reason. He didn't. And then we landed with what we landed with. Yes,
but of course there was an elaborate ruse before that. There was an attempt to offer the deputy presidency to Buthelezi at the time. Buthelezi realized that the role is ceremonial. He wanted the power in KwaZulu-Natal and of course turned it down. But there was also a point where you speak very poignantly about your and the then Minister of Intelligence, Lindiwe Sisulu's initiatives to try and get President Mbeki to accept that the rule of law needs to deal with President Jacob Zuma, that there cannot be a whiff of political interference because it will alienate and it will divide the African National Congress further. But the sense that I certainly got from the book, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that he then became obsessed with the fact that Jacob Zuma was not going to be the president of the ANC, and he stood for a third time. So much so that Lindiwe Sisulu begged you on the eve of the Polokwane conference to still go to Thabo Mbeki and say withdraw, because she of course knew that President Zuma was going to have a landslide victory.
Well, I wouldn't say that Mbeki interfered with the legal process. But what was clear is that he was wishing for something to happen that will make Zuma not legible for the position. And we were worried that his behavior was giving the impression to the public, to the alliance, that he wanted Zuma out. And that was going to cause a rift within the alliance and within the ANC. We were worried about that. So when we were talking to him, we were talking about the need to have a global intelligence view about what might be the repercussions if he is seen to be taking a position. But I don't think he was actively interfering. I've got no evidence of him actively interfering. But he willed the developments to happen. So when he fired Zuma in Parliament, I mean, I was one of those people who was worried, is that really what he's going to do? Because we were worried about what the repercussions were.
Yeah.
But he went on and did it. But in our view was that he's behaving in a way that everybody is going to say, oh, okay, yeah, actually that's what he wanted to do. And we don't know what else he might be doing to influence the situation.
And of course the big issue was the fact that many people argued that the simple thing would have been for Bulelani Ngcuka to actually just charge Zuma and let the courts handle the matter. It would take the political pressure off President Mbeki. Everyone was equal before the law. Shabir had to stand trial, and so should President Jacob Zuma at the time, or Deputy President Zuma at the time.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you believe that that was the fatal mistake that Bulelani Ngcuka made and opened a door that we still cannot close?
Well, I don't know. I'm not a legal person, so I can't comment. I mean, he made a statement that he made that the case was not winnable. I'm not in a position to judge.
Let's shift now. Of course, you served both presidents, and you also served President Jacob Zuma. And I was fascinated by your account of working in this new presidency. And of course, you were his Director General, if I'm not mistaken. But you found yourself on the outside constantly. You found yourself undermined constantly, particularly by the head of the private office of President Jacob Zuma, by Lakela Kaunda. You cite examples, for instance, where she would call meetings without your knowledge. People will just be sent to be employed without you being informed. What do you think was the point of keeping you in the presidency, if the point was to sideline you anyway, and Lakela was in fact the power behind the threat? She knew she spoke with the authority of the president.
Well, Zuma told me that, I mean, when he brought me in, he had all the confidence in me. But he told me that when he called me in, there are people who are against it. And they told him so, especially people who are close to him. And they tried to convince him not to, because I was seen as Tokyo's man.
Yes.
And they were of the view that Tokyo still had ambitions to run again. So they were saying, no, you can't take that man. You might be taking a mole for Tokyo Sekwale.
Yeah, and you were at Mvelapanda at some point.
Yeah, of course, I came from Mvelapanda. So everything that happened then, according to his explanation to me, was largely because there was this force around him that was saying, no, you have a wrong man there. So something needed to be done. So I got sidelined. I think in the long run, he also began to buy into this thing.
Yes.
To say, all right, even if he still wanted me to stay, but he couldn't withstand the pressure from his lobby that was saying, I need to go.
What was fascinating for me was you write on page 394, you say, at a party that was held for you, a going-away party, you said, when I was finished closing my remarks, a senior official from Mosanda, which is the intelligence headquarters, approached my table quietly and told me he wanted to discuss a sensitive matter with me. He suggested that we meet away from Mount Grace because he didn't want his colleagues to see him conferring with me. And then you, of course, say that he found me waiting on a cement bench at a filling station. He then said the following: Vusi, the only reason I am here is my conscience. I cannot live with my conscience if I don't tell you this thing. We fought for this democracy. We've tried to uphold the integrity of the intelligence services. You are part of that tradition, he said, and I thanked him. And then he dropped a bombshell. Vusi, your personal communications are being monitored and systematically intercepted by the NCC. The products are sent to the old man. I think it's wrong and needed to tell you. You need to be careful what you communicate by email or by phone. You then say, my mouth went dry. The old man's was a reference to Zuma. And then he said, I'm not the only one who is aware of what is happening. I know it's difficult for other colleagues to come and tell you. Thank you for your honesty and integrity, and that's you. And thanks for the information. And of course, there you realize that you are the chief of staff in the presidency, but you are being spied on by your very same president.
Yeah, it was dramatic. I mean, I say my mouth went dry because that's exactly what happened. I had never imagined something like that could happen. The person who told me was so senior in the intelligence service that I had no reason to doubt him.
Yes.
And I just said, and he's a person of integrity. I really had no reason to doubt him, and I could tell in his face and his eye that he was really concerned.
What do you think is the reason why conspiracy thrives in the African National Congress the way it does? Do you think it's because the movement has never really dealt with the extent to which it was actually compromised and infiltrated by the Boers? Do you think it's a part of our history we are too ashamed to revisit because it might destroy the mythology of our revolution?
I don't think it's a typically ANC problem. I mean, in the book, I cite a Ghanaian writer who talks about the same thing happened in his country. He makes a lot of examples of that. And his argument is that once politics becomes polarized, it opens room for mischievous elements to come in, for people who trade on rumors and gossip and so on. So the reality is that if you keep a solid organization and their comrades and you don't allow this inter-political fight within, an intra-political fight within an organization, that's the only way you can keep out those people who want to destroy the movement. You see, in my view, I mean, some other people might disagree with me. You know, the fallout between Mbeki and Zuma, that fight, that is the biggest tragedy of post-94 in South Africa. I mean, most of the things that are happening now, we're talking about state capture, we're talking about VPS, we're talking about corruption, people are toying in the street. That's where the problem started. When the ANC started to have problem and to disintegrate itself, and immorality to come in and corruption to come, it opened the room for everything else.
Yes, of course. That's where we will have to leave it, sadly. Thank you so very much for joining us. Well, that about wraps it up for us this evening. You've had your fix. I'll see you again next week. Take care and good night.